Sheikh Muhammad Abduh was born in the year 1849 in Ottoman Egypt. During his youth, he memorized the Holy Quran and eventually became a teacher at the Al-Azhar University. He used his position to speak out against injustice, and he spoke out against the Ottoman governor of Egypt, known as Ismail Pasha, and called for an end to forced labor and heavy taxation. He later established his own political party, known as the Free Patriotic Party, which called for the resignation of Ismail Pasha. When the British occupied Egypt, Sheikh Muhammad Abduh declared a jihad against the British and called on Egyptians to revolt against the occupiers. In 1882, he was arrested and exiled by British authorities after he participated in an anti-British rebellion. Therefore, he took refuge in Lebanon, where he became a teacher at the Sultaniya school in Beirut. During this period, Sheikh Abduh also visited Algeria and Tunisia to show solidarity with Muslims living under French rule. Sheikh Muhammad Abduh returned to Egypt after 6 years when he was pardoned by the British and was eventually appointed as the Mufti of Egypt by the British-backed king known as Abbas Pasha. He called on his students to rise up against colonialism, and many of his students would go on to fight the British, such as Izzuddin al-Qassam, who led an armed rebellion against the British in Palestine. However, Sheikh Muhammad Abduh avoided direct confrontation with the British authorities in Egypt, as armed rebellion had previously proved to be a failure in Egypt. Therefore, he focused on reforming Egyptian society so that it would be strong enough to resist British rule. He criticized the British-backed Egyptian ruler known as Abbas Pasha for allowing the British to manage all of the country's institutions, and he spoke out against the British policy of arresting intellectuals. In one of his speeches addressing the British authorities, he stated, "We see that your kindness to us is like the kindness of a wolf to a lamb. You have eliminated the good elements within our society so that you can have an excuse to stay in our country." Sheikh Muhammad Abduh believed that the main reason that the Muslims of the 20th century were being colonized was because of their lack of knowledge and their lack of interest in science and development. He stated, "The Muslims fell behind all nations in knowledge. They were ignorant of the land they were on and were weak in extracting its benefits. Then the foreigner came to snatch it from their hands." Sheikh Muhammad Abduh called on Abbas Pasha to increase his investment in education. He stated, "The government spends only 200,000 Egyptian pounds on education out of an income of 12 million pounds. It also keeps raising school fees to the point where education is becoming a luxury that only exists in a few rich homes." After obtaining funds from the government of Abbas Pasha, Sheikh Muhammad Abduh updated the curriculum of the Al-Azhar University, which was previously just a religious institution, and he introduced the subjects of geography, engineering, mathematics, and other modern sciences. Muhammad Abduh also translated the works of revolutionary Western writers such as Herbert Spencer and Leo Tolstoy, and integrated them into the Egyptian curriculum. He also promoted arts such as photography and acting in order to encourage creativity and innovation among Egyptians. Sheikh Muhammad Abduh called on Egyptians to be productive and take charge of their own government and institutions, and he spoke out against materialism, hedonism, and drug use in Egyptian society. Eventually, Muhammad Abduh began to clash with Abbas Pasha after he began to criticize corruption within his government and began to expose government officials who had taken bribes. As a result, Abbas Pasha tried to defame Sheikh Muhammad Abduh with the help of the religious elite, who accused Sheikh Muhammad Abduh of being an infidel. In response to these clerics, Sheikh Muhammad Abduh stated, "Faith in God raises souls above submission and enslavement to leaders who have humiliated humans through religious authority. Overthrowing religious authority is one of the foundations of Islam, and slavery to other than God relegates humans to the level of harnessed animals or cultivated crops. Islam did not give these people the slightest authority in judging people's faith. A Muslim has no right over another Muslim except the right of advice and guidance." Sheikh Muhammad Abduh called on Muslims to stay away from extremism and called on all Muslims to unite against colonialism. He also called for an end to sectarianism. Although he was a Sunni, he wrote a commentary of the book known as Nahj al-Balagha, which was compiled by a Shia writer. He continued to call for independence from British rule, and he continued to speak out against pro-British Egyptian officials. He stated, "We do not want traitors whose faces are Egyptian and whose hearts are English." Sheikh Muhammad Abduh was eventually removed from his position as the Grand Mufti of Egypt in 1905. However, despite this, Muhammad Abduh continued his activism and his mission to reform and unite the Muslim world against colonialism. He stated, "A person should reject the humiliation of being a subservient slave to people for the sake of a religious or worldly title. He does not require these titles because God has honored him with faith." Throughout his life, Sheikh Muhammad Abduh wrote many books, including Islam, Science and Civilization, The Message of Monotheism, and The Secret History of England's Occupation of Egypt. Sheikh Muhammad Abduh passed away in July 1905.